Trump and Putin had another, undisclosed conversation at G20. U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin had another, previously undisclosed conversation at this month's G20, the White House has confirmed. They spoke towards the end of a formal dinner, but the White House has not revealed what was discussed. President Trump has condemned media revelations of the talks as sick. The two leaders' relationship is under scrutiny amid allegations of Russian interference in the U.S. election. U.S. intelligence agencies believe Moscow tried to tip the election in Mr. Trump's favor, something denied by Russia. Mr. Trump has rejected allegations of any collusion. The extra conversation happened during a private meal of heads of state at the G20 summit in Hamburg earlier in the month. The Kremlin said at the time that the two leaders had had an opportunity to continue their discussion during the dinner, but the extent of the meeting was not known. Mr. Trump left his seat and headed to Mr. Putin, who had been sitting next to Mr. Trump's wife Melania, U.S. media said. The U.S. president was alone with Mr. Putin, apart from the attendance of the Russian president's official interpreter. Mr. Trump had been seated next to Japanese PM Shinzo Abe's wife, so the U.S. interpreter at the dinner spoke Japanese, not Russian. No media were in attendance. Analysis: uncomfortable questions raised. Jonathan Marcus, BBC News defense and diplomatic correspondent. Given the poor state of relations between Washington and Moscow and the controversy surrounding Russia's efforts to interfere with the U.S. presidential campaign, each and every encounter between Mr. Putin and Mr. Trump is bound to be carefully scrutinized. Thus, the apparently impromptu discussion between the two men at the G20 dinner inevitably raises many questions. What was President Trump seeking to do in approaching the Russian president? Were matters of substance discussed? If so, why was no formal note taken? And why did the U.S. president have to rely upon a Russian official for translation? This is all highly unusual, especially at a time when relations between the two countries are laden with so many problems. Mr. Trump also appeared unaware of another dimension, the message that his tête-à-tête would send to other leaders in the room, who must have watched the U.S. president's gambit with some unease. The length of the talks has been disputed. Ian Bremmer, president of the U.S.-based Eurasia Group, who first reported them in a newsletter to clients, said, Donald Trump got up from the table and sat down with Putin for about an hour. It was very animated and very friendly. No one else was nearby, so the topics of discussion were not known, he said. Mr. Bremmer had not been at the dinner but said details were given to him by unnamed attendees who, he said, were flummoxed, confused and startled by the turn of events. At summit meetings you have little policitas between heads of state to discuss business all the time. A one-hour policite is highly unusual in any context, he told the BBC. A one-hour policite between Putin and Trump where only the Kremlin translator is there, where we don't know what's discussed, given the uniqueness of the U.S.-Russia relationship, makes the U.S. president surprisingly and disturbingly not credible. In a statement, a senior White House official said there was no second meeting, just a brief conversation after dinner. The official said, the insinuation that the White House has tried to hide a second meeting is false, malicious and absurd. It is not merely perfectly normal, it is part of a president's duties. to interact with world leaders. National Security Council spokesman Michael Anton said, "A conversation over dessert should not be characterized as a meeting." Mr. Trump later said on Twitter, "Fake news story of secret dinner with Putin is sick." All G20 leaders and spouses were invited by the Chancellor of Germany. Press New. The dinner and its attendees have always been known. Only the Trump-Putin discussion had not been reported before. At the earlier, formal meeting, their first face-to-face encounter, Mr. Trump said he had repeatedly pressed Mr. Putin about the allegations of interference in the U.S. vote. "I said, 'Did you do it?' He said, 'No, I did not, absolutely not.' I then asked him a second time, in a totally different way. He said, 'Absolutely not.' There are congressional investigations, and one by a special counsel, into the allegations of Russian interference in the U.S. election and possible collusion with the Trump team." On Tuesday, the Senate Intelligence Committee said it wanted to interview Mr. Trump's son, Donald Jr., and other members of the Trump team over a meeting they had with a Russian lawyer in June last year. Mr. Trump Jr. said he had attended the meeting with Natalia Veselnitskaya as he was promised damaging material on Hillary Clinton, but it did not materialize. On Wednesday, Ms. Veselnitskaya told Russia RT television channel she would be willing to testify before the Senate on the matter. Meanwhile, the White House said Mr. Trump would nominate former Utah Governor Jon Huntsman as ambassador to Russia, a key post for a president who promised to improve relations with Moscow. Mr. Huntsman, who served as ambassador to China and Singapore, needs to have his name confirmed by the Senate. The suspicions over Russian interference are likely to play a significant factor in his confirmation process, correspondents say.